My name is Olivia Bennett. I am 29 years old from Denver, Colorado. And today, I'm going to tell you a story about betrayal so shocking. It completely changed the way I see family, trust, and survival. Because imagine this for a moment, the two people who are supposed to protect your future secretly working behind the scenes to destroy it. And the worst part, I didn't even know it was happening until one phone call changed everything. What would you do if every job you applied for suddenly rejected you, one after another? What if interviewers who once sounded excited suddenly went cold the moment they checked your background? Would you start questioning your skills or your reputation? Now imagine discovering that someone had been secretly calling those companies, telling them you had a criminal record that never existed. But what if the people spreading that lie weren't strangers, not jealous coworkers, not competitors? What if the voices ruining your career were your own parents? And what would you do when the truth finally surfaced and they realized you had proof? Stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. At first, nothing felt unusual. You know how job searching goes. You send out dozens of applications, polish your resume, rehearse your answers, and hope one opportunity finally opens the right door. That's exactly what I was doing. After finishing graduate school, I was excited. I had worked hard, built a strong resume, and even completed 2 internships that gave me real-world experience. For the first time in my life, I felt like everything was finally moving forward. So I started applying: marketing firms, tech startups, corporate offices, even a few nonprofit organizations. And at first, things looked promising. Within a couple of weeks, my inbox was filling up with interview requests. Recruiters sounded enthusiastic on the phone. Some of them even said things like, "Your background is exactly what we're looking for." One hiring manager from a mid-sized tech company told me, "Olivia, I think you'd be a perfect fit here, perfect fit." Those words stayed in my head for days, because when you're job hunting, hearing something like that feels like hope. The first interview went great, then the second, then the third. But something strange started happening after that. Every single time I reached the final stages of the hiring process, something changed. Suddenly, emails would stop. Phone calls wouldn't be returned. Follow-ups were ignored. At first, I told myself not to overthink it. Rejections happen. Maybe someone else just had more experience. Maybe another candidate accepted the job faster. Maybe it was just bad timing. But then the pattern started becoming impossible to ignore. One recruiter scheduled a second interview with me and sounded incredibly excited. She even said, "We just need to run the standard background check and we should be good to go." 2 days later, silence. No explanation, no response to emails, nothing. That's when the doubt started creeping in. Maybe my resume wasn't as strong as I thought. Maybe I wasn't interviewing as well as I believed. Maybe I was saying something wrong without realizing it. But the real turning point came during an interview with a company in Chicago. The hiring manager had been incredibly friendly throughout the process. By the third interview, he was already talking about onboarding timelines. He even asked when I would be available to start. That's when I started feeling confident again. Finally, something was working. But the next morning, I received an email. It was short, cold, and completely different from his previous tone. "After reviewing your application further, we've decided to move forward with another candidate." That was it. No explanation, no feedback, just rejection, and something about it felt off. The sudden shift didn't make sense. The day before, they were talking about start dates. Now they were acting like I had never been a serious candidate. I tried brushing it off again. But the same thing kept happening. Interview, excitement, background check, silence, rejection over and over again. After the 7th rejection in a row, I started losing sleep. My confidence started collapsing. I began questioning everything about myself. Was I doing something wrong during interviews? Did I accidentally say something inappropriate? Was there something on my record I didn't know about? But that last thought didn't make sense. I had never been arrested, never been involved in anything illegal, not even a speeding ticket. So why did things keep falling apart the moment companies checked my background? Then something happened that made my stomach drop. During one interview, a recruiter asked a question that didn't sound normal. She paused before saying it, almost like she was unsure if she should ask. Then she said quietly, "Before we move forward, is there anything in your past you'd like to clarify?" I frowned. "Clarify what?" I asked. She hesitated, then quickly changed the subject. "Never mind, let's continue." But by then, my mind was racing. Clarify what? Why would she ask me that? What did she think was in my past? That was the moment I realized something was wrong. Not just with my job search, but with the story someone, somewhere, was telling about me, and I had no idea who was behind it, or how many people had already heard it. Everything changed because of one phone call. You know how life sometimes moves quietly, slowly, almost normally, and then suddenly, one conversation shatters everything you thought was true. That's exactly what happened to me. It started with another interview. This one felt different from the beginning. The recruiter was polite, professional, almost overly careful with his words. He asked all the standard questions about my experience, my education, my goals for the future. Everything was going smoothly. Then he said something that made my chest tighten. He cleared his throat and said, "We just need to discuss one final concern before moving forward." I remember sitting straighter in my chair, because every job seeker knows that phrase. It usually means something isn't going well. Then he asked the question that changed everything. "Why didn't you mention the criminal case your parents warned us about?" I felt like the room went completely silent. My brain couldn't process what I had just heard. My parents' criminal case. I literally froze. For a few seconds, I didn't even know how to respond, because there was no criminal case. I repeated the question slowly, thinking maybe I misheard him. "My parents?" I asked. There was an awkward pause on the other end of the phone. Then he said something even worse. "Yes. They called earlier and said there was a legal issue in your past that you failed to disclose." My stomach dropped. My hands started shaking. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. Because suddenly, everything started making terrifying sense. The sudden rejections, the strange questions during interviews, the cold tone from recruiters after background checks. Someone had been calling these companies. Someone was lying about me, but the worst part? It wasn't a stranger. It was my own parents. I forced myself to stay calm on the phone. I didn't want to sound emotional or defensive because I knew that could make things worse. So I asked him, very carefully, "What exactly did they say about me?" He hesitated. Then he explained that they had warned the company about a supposed criminal record involving financial fraud and bad debt history. I almost dropped my phone. Financial fraud. I had never even owned a credit card at that point. The recruiter actually sounded uncomfortable as he spoke. He said, "Honestly, we thought it was strange. They sounded very convincing, though. They said they were protecting your reputation." Protecting my reputation? No, they were destroying my future. After the call ended, I just sat there staring at the wall. My mind was racing. Why would my parents do this? What did they think they were accomplishing? Were they trying to force me to move back home? Were they trying to keep me dependent on them? The emotional shock was worse than anger, because this wasn't just betrayal. This was calculated sabotage. They didn't just spread rumors casually. They were actively contacting employers. They were giving out my personal information, and they were presenting themselves as concerned parents trying to protect me. That was the part that hurt the most. Because they were using concern as a weapon. Later that night, I checked my voicemail history, and that's when I noticed something terrifying. There were unknown numbers calling my phone while I was in interviews. Numbers I had ignored because I assumed they were spam. But now I wondered, what if those were companies trying to verify information? What if I had missed opportunities because I didn't answer those calls? I felt sick. Because this wasn't just about one job. This was about my entire reputation being quietly rewritten behind my back. I wanted to confront my parents immediately, to demand answers, to ask them how they could do this to their own child. But I knew I had to stay calm and gather proof first, because if I confronted them without evidence, they would just deny everything and pretend they were victims trying to help me. So instead of reacting in anger, I started investigating quietly. I started saving emails, recording recruiter conversations, asking companies to send written explanations for their decisions, and every new piece of information only made the betrayal feel heavier, because it wasn't just one call, it was multiple calls. Multiple companies, multiple opportunities destroyed before I even knew the war had started. At this point, I wasn't just hurt, I was confused. Because betrayal hurts, yes, but confusion is even worse. When someone you love does something terrible, your brain starts searching for excuses for them. You start asking yourself questions you don't want to ask. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they were trying to protect me from something. Maybe they thought they were helping. But deep down, I already knew something was wrong. Because love doesn't usually look like secret phone calls to employers. So I started looking deeper into their behavior over the years. And that's when everything started connecting like pieces of a dark puzzle. My parents had always been very controlling about my life decisions, not in an obvious, aggressive way. More like subtle emotional pressure. When I was younger, they encouraged me to stay close to home for college instead of going to a bigger city. They would say things like, "The world is dangerous," or "You don't understand how cruel people can be." At the time, I thought they were just protective. But looking back, it was always about keeping me close, keeping me dependent, keeping me under their influence. The moment I graduated and started talking about moving to a new city for career opportunities, things started getting tense at home. They didn't directly say I couldn't go. Instead, they used emotional tactics. They would remind me how much they had sacrificed for me. They would bring up financial struggles. They would talk about how lonely they would feel if I moved away. At the time, I felt guilty just thinking about leaving, and that was probably the plan. Because emotional control is often more powerful than physical control. But when I finally started applying for jobs in different cities, that's when their behavior became even more suspicious. My mother would randomly ask questions like, "Did you tell them everything about your past?" At first, I thought she was just being supportive. But now I realized she was actually trying to see how much information I was sharing. They wanted to control the narrative about me. If I became independent, I would no longer need them. And that scared them. So what did they do? They created a story powerful enough to keep me trapped in one place. They told employers I had a criminal record involving financial misconduct. Why that specific lie? Because it was believable enough to stop hiring decisions immediately. Companies are cautious about financial crimes. Even if there is doubt, they usually choose the safer candidate. So instead of directly attacking my character publicly, they attacked my credibility behind the scenes. It was psychological warfare disguised as parental concern. The most disturbing part was how they justified it to themselves. From what I later learned through a family conversation I secretly recorded, they genuinely believed they were protecting me. My father had said something chilling during one argument I overheard through the house hallway. He said, "If she becomes too independent, she will forget who raised her." That wasn't protection. That was possession. They weren't afraid of me failing. They were afraid of losing control over me, because my success without them would expose something they didn't want to face. That I could survive and thrive without their influence. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about jobs. This was about power. They wanted me emotionally dependent, financially dependent, and geographically close to home. So by destroying my job opportunities, they were forcing me into a position where I would have no choice but to stay. And the worst part, they were doing it while pretending to be loving parents. That contradiction hurt more than the betrayal itself, because they would hug me in the morning and potentially call my employers in the afternoon. Love mixed with manipulation is one of the most dangerous forms of control, and now I understood their motive clearly. It wasn't hatred, it wasn't jealousy, it was fear. fear of losing authority over my life. But once I understood that motive, something inside me changed, because understanding the enemy is the first step toward breaking free from their control. At this point in my life, I was standing at a crossroads between emotion and strategy, because trust me, I wanted to confront them immediately. I wanted to walk into the house, look them in the eyes, and ask them how they could destroy my future like that. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted answers right now. But anger is powerful, yet reckless, and I knew one thing very clearly. If I confronted them without proof, they would do what manipulators always do. They would deny everything. They would turn the situation around and make me feel like I was overreacting, maybe even call me ungrateful. So instead of reacting emotionally, I decided to move carefully like I was solving a criminal investigation. Because at this point, that's exactly what it felt like. A slow, quiet war for my reputation. The first thing I did was start organizing every piece of evidence I could find. I created a folder on my laptop labeled Career Records. Inside that folder, I started saving everything: interview confirmation emails, recruiter messages, follow-up responses, and most importantly, rejection emails that contained suspicious wording, because I started noticing something strange. Many of the rejection emails used similar phrasing, almost like they were following a script. Phrases like, "after further review of your background," or "concerns regarding verification information," kept appearing again and again. But they never explained what those concerns actually were. That vagueness was suspicious. If I had actually done something wrong, companies would usually be more direct. But here, everything felt deliberately unclear, so I started doing something smarter. I began requesting feedback from recruiters directly, not aggressively, just professionally. I would send polite emails saying, "Thank you for the opportunity. If possible, could you provide any feedback that would help me improve for future applications?" Most companies never responded. But one did, and that response was terrifyingly revealing. The recruiter told me that they had received information from a third party claiming I had legal financial issues. They didn't name who that third party was, but I already knew, because the timing lined up perfectly with my parents' behavior. That was when I decided I needed stronger proof, not just for me, but for anyone else who would have to listen when I finally spoke the truth. So I started paying attention to phone records. I went through my call logs carefully. And that's when I noticed something disturbing. There were repeated incoming calls from unknown numbers during times when I was usually in interviews. Some of those numbers were local businesses. Some were corporate switchboards, and a few were private numbers I couldn't trace immediately. It made me realize something horrifying. They weren't just making one or two calls. This was systematic. Strategic, almost planned like a campaign. I also started saving text messages where my parents would ask about my job search progress. On the surface, they sounded supportive. But now, I noticed hidden intentions in their questions. They would ask things like, "Did they run a background check yet?" Or "Did they ask about your past?" At the time, I thought they were just showing interest, but now I understood. They were trying to see how much damage their lies had already caused. The most powerful piece of evidence, however, came from an accidental discovery. One evening, I overheard my mother talking on the phone in the kitchen. She didn't realize I was standing near the hallway. She was speaking in a low voice, but I could still hear fragments of the conversation. She mentioned my name, she mentioned companies, and then she said something chilling. "She will come back home eventually when nobody hires her." My chest tightened, because that wasn't concern, that was psychological pressure, that was intentional isolation. After that moment, I knew I couldn't act impulsively. I needed a stronger strategy, so I kept gathering evidence quietly, patiently. Like I was building a case file against people who were supposed to love me, because sometimes survival isn't about fighting immediately. Sometimes survival is about waiting until the truth becomes so strong that it cannot be denied. The confrontation didn't happen the way I imagined it would. You know how you rehearse these moments in your head? You picture yourself standing tall, speaking confidently, delivering the truth like a courtroom speech. But real life is never that dramatic. It's quieter, more emotional, and sometimes far more powerful. I didn't expose them immediately. I waited, because I wanted the truth to explode in a place where they couldn't control the narrative. And that moment came unexpectedly. It started when I received a call from one of the companies I had applied to months earlier. The recruiter sounded nervous, almost uncomfortable. He said, "We need to clarify something before we finalize your application status." My heart started pounding, because this was different from rejection emails. This sounded like something was about to be revealed. He then told me something shocking. They had received multiple calls from people claiming to be my guardians, warning them about my supposed criminal background. But this time, the recruiter said something even more important. He told me they had recorded the call logs for verification purposes because the situation seemed unusual. That was my moment. That was my proof, not just emotional proof, not just suspicion, but documented evidence that someone was intentionally sabotaging my career opportunities. I asked if they could send me copies of those records for my personal reference. They agreed. And when I saw those records, my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone, because the call timestamps matched my interview schedule perfectly. Whoever was calling knew exactly when I would be in hiring processes. This wasn't random gossip. This was planned interference. That night, I made a decision. I would confront them, but not with anger, with evidence, because evidence is harder to fight than emotions. The confrontation happened at our family dinner table. My father was talking about normal things at first: work, weather, random daily topics. Then I placed my phone on the table, and I said something very calmly. "I know about the calls you made to my employers." The room went silent. My mother's face changed instantly, not with fear, with something worse, defensive anger. She immediately said, "We were protecting you. You don't understand how dangerous the world is." But this time, I didn't argue. I simply showed them the call records, the timestamps, the company names, the recorded verification notes from recruiters. That was when the story they had been telling for years started collapsing. My father tried to stay calm at first. He said I was being dramatic, that I was misinterpreting their intentions, but I asked one simple question. "If you were protecting me, why did you tell them I had a criminal record that doesn't exist?" He had no answer. Silence is often louder than shouting. My mother started crying, but not in guilt. More like frustration because her control was slipping away. She tried to guilt me by saying, "After everything we sacrificed for you," but I interrupted her. Not loudly, just firmly. I told them I appreciated their sacrifices, but sacrifice is not the same as control. Love does not require destroying someone's future to keep them close. That was the moment everything shifted. Because they realized I wasn't reacting emotionally, I was speaking from strength, from knowledge, from truth. In the following weeks, something unexpected happened. They stopped making calls to employers, maybe because they knew I had proof, maybe because they were afraid I would go public, but the damage they caused didn't disappear immediately. Rebuilding my reputation took time. Trust takes years to build, but only moments to destroy. Still, that night changed me forever, because I learned something powerful. Sometimes victory isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming control over your own story. And the most powerful weapon against lies is the truth spoken with patience, proof, and courage. If this story shocked you, then you need to hear this. Because betrayal like this doesn't just happen in stories, it happens in real life. And sometimes, the only way to protect your future is to pay attention to the warning signs early. Have you ever experienced something similar? Maybe not this extreme, but maybe someone tried to control your opportunities, your relationships, or your success behind your back. If you enjoyed this story, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life emotional storytelling. And I want you to do something important today. Check your own life. Check your opportunities. Check who is supporting your success and who might secretly be trying to limit it, because sometimes the biggest enemies aren't strangers. Sometimes they are the people who smile at you every day. Stay strong, stay aware, and I'll see you in the next story.